The definition of good music is music that moves you. It's something that stirs up emotion and gets you feeling something, whether that's feeling good or feeling energy or feeling sad. It's feeling something. Music has always been a part of my life. I'm very lucky to be able to have a career and be able to make a living and support my family, and also be able to do cool things in the music industry.
Welcome back, Schmoozers. For those of you that are new here, I am David Cobby, and I'm on a mission to inspire Jews to be proud of their identity and leverage their personal brands. For this podcast, I've been blessed with the opportunity to interview so many successful Jewish CEOs, magicians, former athletes, media personalities, and helped all of them share stories about their respective personal brands. Have you ever met someone who is an atheist Jew, music junkie, and a real estate expert? My guess is probably not, unless you've met this week's guest. From his advocacy efforts and passion for doing what he loves, my next guest has built a name and strong reputation for himself, not only around his local community within Detroit, but also around the world. Here with us to talk about his personal brand and why he is a proud Jew, please welcome to my show, Benji Rosenzweig. Benji, how are we doing today, man?
Good. Thank you so much. I hope I live up to that intro. That was very kind of you.
You absolutely do live up to that intro, and it's honored to have you on the show. And everything you've been doing on social media with your brand, and whether it's advocating for your daughter or advocating for music, there's just so many areas that you're doing kind of like advocacy work on the side, aside from your real job, which is, one of the reasons what attracted me to reaching out to you. And, one of the cool things about you is that you're very entrenched within your community in Detroit. And I saw that you guys just had a Hanukkah event there. I believe it's called Menorah and the D. So I know you were one of the founding members kind of on the board for planning and everything. And I think I saw that Kosha Dills was there. So before we get to the real interview, I want to hear how that went, because as we're recording this interview, tonight's going to be the third night of Hanukkah.
Tonight's going to be the third night of Hanukkah. Yeah. So, my wife and I are involved in the local Chabad community, and we'll get to what that means as an atheist and why I'm involved in the Chabad. We'll get there, but take me at my word for now. And 15 years ago, we did a Hanukkah event there. It was a music program, and we were playing music. My dad was playing music, and it went well. And the following year, they asked me if I would help plan another Hanukkah event, and I said no. Doesn't make sense. And they said, why not? And I said, listen, Hanukkah is such a difficult time to get people to come out for stuff, right? Between your friends' events and your kids' events and your school events and your kids' friends' events and your in-laws, unless you're going to do something buck wild, I don't want to plan another event that the same 250 people are going to come to who are already coming to whatever shul event you do. You got to do something buck wild. And they said, well, what would you consider buck wild? And 14 years ago, Detroit wasn't where it is today. It was just starting that, sort of resurgence. We were just a few years into this resurgence of Detroit. And I said, well, why don't you go downtown and let's build a 10-foot ice sculpture and, make that a menorah, and we'll light that, and we'll get, 250, 300 people, but it'll be different. It'll be special. And they said, great, here's a budget, go do that. And I was like, hey, man, you were supposed to say no. That wasn't, I thought of the craziest thing that I could think of so that so that I could get out of this. And our goal was to have 300 people, and we had 600 people. And we were shocked. We couldn't believe it. People really enjoyed what we did. And so we went on a little, I don't know what the right word. We went on a search to find the best Detroit artists to build the biggest, baddest menorah around. And there's a group called the Detroit Design Center, which is Eric and Israel Nordin, who are not Jewish. They're They're just great Detroit artists, and they built this 26-foot to the top of the menorah, not including the candle. So it's like 27 and a half feet to the flame, from the floor to the flame. It's like 27 and a half feet. Absolutely beautiful. It's made out of steel and it's got some glass plates in it. And it's the coolest thing in the world. And so 13 years ago, we started using that. And pre-COVID, we were, for like the 4 years before COVID, we had like 4,000 to 5,000 people. So it's the largest annual Jewish gathering in Michigan. And it's really the way that the metro area brings in Hanukkah. You know, like all the news stations, like when they talk about Hanukkah's coming and we know Menorah and the D is on the first night of Hanukkah and this is where it is. And so we've really created sort of like, this is how Hanukkah starts in Michigan. And I'm really grateful for that. Like it's really awesome.
I think, you know, especially because the Michigan area isn't so well known for having a large Jewish population. I think really anywhere in the Midwest, aside from Chicago, people are like, there's no Jews there. Like when I say, oh, I'm a Jew from Minnesota, people are like, what? Like they don't understand that Jewish communities exist outside of
you.
Yeah, exactly. But I think there's something to be said about a strong Jewish community. You pretty much know everybody within your community, which I think could be for the better or for the worse, depending on how you look at it. And it's always amazing to me that you can put on events like Menorah and the D, where you have so many people show up, and literally it's the entire community, or at least it's like all the active people within the community. And to have a lot of people rally within one place, especially with everything that's going on in Israel and anti-Semitism in the world, like it's absolutely amazing that you're able to do that. And on top of that, you bring in kosher dill. So I'm glad that event went very well. And I think it kind of, sets the story for your Jewish identity, right? Benji, at the beginning, we mentioned that you are an atheist Jew, which I definitely want to get into. And, living in a community like Detroit, I can only imagine you're one of very few, if any, atheist Jews within Michigan. So I want you to talk about your Jewish identity as an atheist Jew and why you are a proud atheist Jew.
So happy to have this conversation, and I get asked about this all the time. I just want to correct you. There's about 70,000 Jews in the Metro Detroit area,
Okay.
Totaling about 100,000 Jews in Michigan as a state. So between Lansing,
Wow.
and Grand Rapids,
Okay.
Traverse City, and
Okay, so there are a lot of Jews. My bad.
We have a pretty decent Jewish community, and we're actually a very strong Jewish community. If you look at like the federation systems and how we are impactful in the world, in Israel and other places, the philanthropy, the Jewish identity and pride of Jewish values and ability to translate that into action. Places like Chicago and LA and New York look to our community and say, these guys know how to do it. And we're very proud of that. And this is not a federation pitch, but if you're not involved in federation, like federation really, is a system of being able to activate the Jewish community. And Detroit, we do it right. And so, we're a fraction of the New York and LA and Chicago size-wise. We punch way above our weight when it comes to ability to make change and ability to do things. And, that comes in a combination of leadership, which we have an excellent, leadership group, as well as the Jewish community of the last 3, 4, 5 generations sort of set the stage and built that infrastructure so that, the next generation does that. So they really, to use Hanukkah terms, they're lamplighters. We had some really excellent lamplighters who sort of set the stage for this is how to This is how to be an active Jewish person. So atheism. My father was an Orthodox rabbi. My mother's father was an Orthodox rabbi. My grandmother's family were Satmar Hasidim. In fact, my grandmother's father was the shochet in Satmar. They didn't live in Satmar. They lived like down the road in the Vishivas, which is some Hungarian village or something. But like, ask a Satmar. If I sat down with a Satmar Chassid and told him my great grandfather's family name, like they're known, right? Those were people. So I come from a very active, Jewish, Orthodox, religious, involved community. I remember asking questions in grade school, in yeshiva, in high school, in yeshiva, and never getting proper answers that made sense. And I was always told, you're asking the wrong questions. And I was like, how could I be asking the wrong questions? You're not answering the questions that I have. And I was in 10th grade. And I remember the room that I was in, the people that were in the room with me, and the question that I asked. And the rabbi's answer was, that shouldn't bother you. That's irrelevant. And I said, but it does bother me and it doesn't make sense. And he said, but it shouldn't bother you. And I said, but that's not the right, like, you're not answering the question. And I realized, oh, none of this is literal. None of this is like, we're sitting in a room talking about something that's literal, which is fairy tales. It's parables. It's stories that we tell children so that we can pass information along, but then we grow into adults and we think that those things are literal. And like, it's like that scene from Wizard of Oz where she opens the door and everything goes from black and white into color. Mm-hmm. And it was just this like moment of clarity of like, oh, we were telling parables and describing them as literal. And that's the mistake. And once that happened, I realized that atheism is the reality for me. And, that answered so many, like that was the answer, like to almost every question that I had. And this is not a pitch for atheism. If you believe in God, good for you. I'm happy for you. That's great. But, in my understanding of the world, you've got Christians and Muslims and Hindus and Buddhists and 4,000 plus other religions who all believe that they've got it figured out and they've got the secret sauce and they've got this special relationship, And one of the things I hear, anti-Semites yell, oh, you think you're the chosen people? I'm like, everybody thinks they're the chosen people. Everybody thinks that they're the final word. Muslims say, well, Jews used to be the chosen people, but then we got this revelation and now we have everybody thinks that they have a special and different relationship. And the answer is, we all have this concept of a higher power, probably the same thing, right? And it's this is a terrible analogy, but it's like being a wrestling fan, right? Everybody has their favorite wrestler. That's their favorite wrestler. And right. It's irrelevant, the fact that wrestling is not a real sport. Right. Right? It's rigged. It's scripted. And that's how I see religion. I live a very active Jewish life because my father was Jewish and my grandfather was Jewish and my great-grandfather was Jewish. And, when I don't wear tefillin, I don't do anything like that. And, after October 7th, I was hanging out with a friend of mine who's a Chabad rabbi who said, would you put on tefillin right now? We were talking just about the frustrations of what was going on. He goes, why don't you put on tefillin? And I said, you know what? When my grandfather was in trouble, he put on tefillin. And there's somebody in Gaza right now who would love to put on tefillin and he can't. Wartime rules are different. Sure. If you ask me right now, I'll put on tefillin. Not because all of a sudden I had a revelation and I believe in God, but because that is a Jewish activity that helped me feel connected to what my grandfather did when he was in trouble. And I've got no problem with that. It's the same reason why, my wife and kids, we go to shul on Yom Kippur, or we go to shul on a random Saturday because somebody wakes up and says, let's do that today. And I'm like, okay, not
Right.
because all of a sudden I'm like, oh, this is literal and this is the word of God, but
Right.
because we have a culture, we have a history,
You bring up an excellent point about Judaism. There is that connection with God, right? There is that element of it, putting on tefillin, wearing a kippah, to me, signals that there's somebody higher up above you. There's something to be said about Judaism and the cultural ties to it. And one example of that is community, right? Like when you think of a Jewish community, right, everybody's so welcoming, everybody, it's a very big element of Judaism. When you think of community, there's no real element of God within the community. You're just thinking about the people within the community. And to some people, that is Judaism to them, which I totally understand. Like, you can be Jewish without really believing in a God. And obviously there are areas where I disagree. Like, there are certain mitzvot that you have to do to adhere to God that, like, I think you should do. But again, that's a whole other conversation. Honestly, I applaud you for not only being a proud Jew, but also being openly atheist, because I think there are a lot of Jewish people that have started to drift towards maybe the cultural-ish side of Judaism without really thinking about the connection to God. So I would say, for the most part, like, yes, I agree with your logic. And I think it's important that we have people like you that are speaking out, and whether it's Israel or just Jewish topics in general, it's important to have representation from all groups within Judaism. To transition to a different topic that you're passionate about, and me personally, I'm probably passionate about a different area of this, but music has been a big part of who you are and your identity. You have a business, Why You Jam. Like, you've done a lot of things within the music industry. You literally have 400 million guitars behind you. Like, I think you need another guitar on your wall. So, I guess, like, I don't even know where to start with this topic, because you've done so much within the music industry. How did you fall in love with music?
Whoa, that's a great question. How did I fall in love with music? Music has always been a part of my life. My father was a musician. My father was a singer-songwriter, and so there was always music playing in our house. And it was a combination of the classics, the Neil Youngs and the Bob Dylans and my parents had a pretty diverse array of 60s and 70s music constantly going in the house. And then there was my mother had a rule that we were only allowed to listen to Jewish music on Fridays. And as we were getting ready for Shabbos, there was only Jewish music. As a kid, I got into the grunge music scene. I really loved what I was hearing on the radio in the early 90s. And I really loved when people said, there's no good music on the radio today. And I was like, well, we have Pearl Jam and we have Nirvana and, we have Soundgarden, we have Alice in Chains. And I was like, these bands, they spoke to me. And I was really grateful to, have a bike and a Walkman and just be able to, ride my bike for hours listening to music. And when I got to high school, I was introduced to the Grateful Dead and Fish and all that stuff, and it sort of became my personality, right? The going on tour and listening to music, and I learned how to play, and I am not good enough to make a career out of that, and so I said I always want to have sort of my finger on the pulse, but I was at Yeshiva University from 2001 to 2004. And had a radio show at Yeshiva University called Why You Jam. That is a throwback to YU and the jam scene. And so Why You Jam still being the name of my company and my email address and all that. So that comes from being at Yeshiva University and having this radio show. But I'm very lucky to be able to have a career and be able to make a living and support my family, and also be able to do cool things in the music industry. And actually, one of the coolest things that I've ever done has been local here in Michigan this past year, but we're going to start touring nationally in 2025, and I'm really geeked about that. So if you want to hear about that, I could talk about that.
Yeah, no, I definitely want to hear about, going on tour. And I didn't even realize, to go back for a second, I didn't even realize like the play on words with YU Jam, like, because so for people that are listening to this, it's spelled like WHY, so YU Jam, instead of just the letter Y and U, and he made it at YU, which is like incredibly clever. I didn't even realize that.
There's two guys, David Weinberg and Zacharia Mailer, who were at YU with me, who I'm still friends with today. They gave me the opportunity to start that radio show, and we were just sort of spitballing on the name. And I love a good pun, like, and the ability to take that WHYYOU, YU Jam, and really the origin of that is my favorite shows growing up were VH1 Behind the Music and Storytellers, and that idea of what makes the musician tick, what's the story behind the song, what's the story behind the cover art, what's the story behind the album, why did this guitar player leave this band and join that band, and this guy, like that, the Fleetwood Mac story with the drummer and the bass and the guitar player, and she slept with him and he slept with her, and then he got him back in the band after he left the band. Like, I love that stuff. I love that stuff. And so that was really sort of like the focus of the radio show, YU Jam, just focused on the jam scene. So that actually plays perfectly into the program that we're doing right now, which is called Storied. And this started at the Detroit J, the JCC here in Michigan. And they were looking for programming. They're working on programming to bring in younger people. And I said, let's do a Jewish music festival, but not like klezmer and cantorial music, like cool shit. And they said, what do you mean? And I said, if you had to tell me what the Jewish contribution to the Beatles were, what do you think that is? And I don't know, David, if you're a Beatles fan, but what do you think the Jewish connection? So most people know that their manager was a Jewish guy named Brian Epstein. Okay, so everybody thinks, the Jewish connection to the Beatles is Brian Epstein. And that's true. But Bob Dylan was a huge influence on the Beatles. In fact, Bob Dylan got them high for the first time. They were drinkers. Bob Dylan got them high you guys are great for pop singers, but if you want to change the world, smoke grass, get an acoustic guitar, and write poetry, write love songs. Don't write pop songs. And they wrote the song Norwegian Wood right after that, and said that they were trying to channel Bob Dylan, and the album Rubber Soul came from this meeting with Bob Dylan. But the guys who owned the Cavern Club or managed the Cavern Club where the Beatles, played their early shows, those guys were Jewish. The guy who was their filmmaker who made Help and A Hard Day's Night, he was Jewish. And there's like all these places in their lives where Jews were participating in the Beatles' career and making them who they were. They weren't Jewish. And so we put together this program called Storied, where we told the story of the legacy of the Beatles and where Jews contributed and collaborated to the Beatles' legacy. And it was extremely successful. It went really well. We actually brought the band Soul Farm in from New York, brought them to Detroit. It was absolutely wonderful. It was 17 stories. And then this fall, we did the second one called Storied the Grunge Era, and focused on where Jews contributed and collaborated with grunge musicians. So sometimes the first set was all the Jews who contributed to the grunge scene but weren't the band members. So the manager of Alice in Chains was a woman by the name of Sarah Silver, who was a Jewish woman, an incredible businesswoman, and she, really shaped not just that band, but she helped shape Nirvana, and she did a lot of work with she was very influential in that scene, and so we told these stories of Jews who helped participate in Rick Rubin. I don't know if you know who Rick Rubin is. Rick Rubin, who's a producer who created the sound of Nine Inch Nails and the Beastie Boys and the Red Hot Chili Pepper. He's a Jewish producer, and he was incredible. So we told that story, and then played those songs. And then the second set was Jews in the music scene, right? So Darcy Retke, who's the bass player from the Smashing Pumpkins, right? So we told her story and played a Smashing Pumpkins song. And Hillel Slovak is like the famous Jewish guitar player from the Red Hot Chili Peppers, but they had the original drummer before Chad was Jewish, and they had a Jewish guitar player for about 10 years when John Frusciante took a break from the band. And so, telling these stories of where Jews actually were in the grunge music scene was pretty special. It was pretty incredible. If you're listening to this, forgive the plug, David, but if you're listening to this and you want that program in your city, please hit me up, because we would really love to spread this message and play this for other people.
By the way, Benji, you're allowed to plug yourself as much as you want. This is the point of the podcast. It's talking about your brand and what you're doing. And, I think to have something like this in Minneapolis, especially because, Bob Dylan was from Duluth, which is like 2 hours away from where I am. But I think, Minneapolis obviously has I would say a pretty underrated music scene. Bob Dylan, Prince obviously is a legend here, not Jewish, but still, like, everybody here still loves Prince, listens to Prince. Like, there's something about music and community, kind of like, the Jewish community, where, a music community, people really rally around each other. And you were talking about how in tough times, right, music kind of is therapeutic in a way. And for me, like, music is something that's therapeutic to me for a number of reasons. So I think when it comes to music, obviously musicians and people that are artists, singers, rappers, guitar players, whatever it is, like, they have a story and a brand, right, that's based on, I would argue, two things. One, their actual music, and two, their story. And oftentimes those kind of get intertwined, where a artist will talk about their story through music. And this kind of ties into personal branding, because, with how people promote themselves to other people and gain recognition and trying to attract attention, music, I would argue, although it's very competitive, right? It is extremely, extremely hard to become recognized for your music across the world. It's also an easy mode of communicating your story and really telling people who you are. So as a music junkie, Benji, I gotta ask you, is it more important to have good music in the sense that the beat is good, the instruments are good, whatever it is, or is the story really what makes the artist the person that really resonates with the audience?
Great question. And I'm going to bring up a story that happened to me on Thursday morning. So yesterday. Okay. And Rami, who's Kosha Dills, is, if he hears this, I hope this doesn't hurt his feelings, and I hope he knows that I'm sharing this because I love what he did. Okay. So I have a friend who is the most negative person I've ever met. Always has something negative to say. He came to the menorah lighting, and he sent me a text message on Thursday morning. I'm pulling up my phone so I can quote this properly. Okay. He sends me a text message on Thursday morning, and he says, "Were you happy with the Kosher Dills performance?" And I said, "I was very happy with it. What about you? What did you think?" And he goes, "Campy, kitschy, and cringy all walk into a bar, ... And I'm like, what? And he goes, "The guy has brass balls getting up there with absolutely no desirable musical talent whatsoever. I found myself thinking even you could have done a better job." And I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? I'm like, there were 3,500 people there who were dancing, who were jumping up and down, who were pulling out their phones and recording it, who were screaming at the top of it. Like, they had a fucking blast. And I realized in his world, Jerry Garcia and Trey Anastasio are the greatest musicians that ever lived, and everybody else is second class. And if you're a rapper, you're not even third class, you're fourth class, right? So this wasn't his style of music. About an hour later, I was sitting with some of the people who put the Menorah and the D together, and they said, "What did you think?" And I relayed this, and I said, "I think that this guy is crazy. I think that Rami did an incredible job." She goes, "Is he a good musician? Is he a good entertainer?" Like, she goes, "I don't know anything about music. Was this good quality music?" And I said, "Listen, if you asked me who the best guitar player in the world is, right, I would argue that it's probably Jake Sininger from Humphreys McGee, or possibly Trey Anastasio. Like, those two are right up there, right? But the truth is that the best guitar player in the world is probably some old guy in Tennessee who sits in a basement and just plays with strings all day, and none of us have ever heard of him. But on a technical proficiency level, he's the greatest guitar player in the world." The definition of good music is music that moves you. It's something that stirs up emotion and gets you feeling something, whether that's feeling good or feeling energy or feeling sad. It's feeling something. Is Rami the greatest rapper in the world on a, are you going to argue the merit of his rhymes and his beats versus Atmospheres or Eminem's or Biggie's or Tupac's or Snoop's? Like, I'm not going to argue that with you. That's a ridiculous argument. What I will tell you is I put him in front of a crowd of 3,500 people, and they all had fun except for my one dipshit friend. And from that perspective, he did a fucking phenomenal job. This isn't an advertisement for Kosher Dills, but I will tell you, if you put him in front of a crowd, the crowd will have fun. Right. That's the definition of good music. So is technical proficiency important? Yeah, technical proficiency is important. If you want to be Fish, if you want to be Humphreys McGee, if you want to be the Grateful Dead, if you want to be Tool, if you want to be Rush, like if you want to be Dream Theater, there's some really amazing bands that are technically like out of this world. I can name you another dozen bands. Dave Matthews Band, technically proficient, like incredible stuff. But my siblings listen to any of those the bands that I just mentioned, and they're like, "That sounds awful. It sounds like trash cans falling downstairs." Right? I get it. If that's not what you like, your technical proficiency is irrelevant. So I think that what's more important, the story or the technical proficiency? It's the combo. I think that storytelling is so important. And by the way, many people rag on rap because they're not real musicians. They're not playing real instruments. Okay, they're moving people by storytelling.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Like, the fact that I could still, recite Biggie lyrics 30 years later because it was so important and impactful and moving when I heard it in the 90s.
Yep.
Does it really matter that he didn't know how to play guitar?
Yeah.
Nope. Yeah.
Nope.
So.
Benji, I can tell like you're so passionate about music. Like, I think you just rattled off. I mean, we've been talking for almost an hour, right? You've rattled off probably like 30 different artist names. Now, caveat, I probably knew like 10 of them, but I'm like I'm blown away at your passion for music. I love to talk to people that are passionate about things they love, because I feel like, maybe we could get into this conversation a little bit, but I feel like our society today, there is a certain kind of person we are supposed to be, right? And it depends on what community we're in, right? If you're in the Jewish community, you have to be a doctor, lawyer, or an entrepreneur. If you're in in another community, there's certain standards that you have to uphold. But for somebody like you to go out of your way and not only advocate for music, advocate for your daughter, which we didn't even talk about, and that's a whole. We could have had literally like 5 podcast episodes on 5 different topics, and I want to try and cover everything. But you're passionate about a lot of things, and that shows up in your advocacy work. And as an outsider looking into you, Benji, you know, the one of the main reasons why I brought you on this podcast is because you promote yourself as an advocate, not just as a real estate expert or a music junkie. You promote yourself as an advocate, and you actually show up and do the advocacy work. You do all these things to advocate for topics you are passionate about outside of your, you know, normal job. So I got to ask you, why is advocacy an important part of how you promote yourself?
That's a great question. My grandfather, my dad's dad, his name was Jacob Rosenzweig. I was really lucky to live down the block from him during my formative years. He would walk from his house to our house every Shabbos morning, pick us up, and we would walk to shul with him. And then, you know, we'd walk home with him, and he would tell me stories and talk about things like Auschwitz and things like growing up in Europe pre-war, and things like, I remember one time between Mincha and Marv on a Shabbos afternoon, some old guy asked me, what did I want to be when I grow up? And my grandfather said, don't answer that question. And I said, why not? And he said, it doesn't matter what you do as long as you do it like a mensch. Because you're 11 years old. You don't know what you want to do when you grow up. Just, you're going to do it like a mensch. So I call him my North Star, right? And I look at things, Mr. Rogers said, look for the helpers, right? And I look for places where I think I can be helpful. And I do what I can, right? You can't pour from an empty cup, right? So I got to take care of myself. I got to take care of my family. I've got a career. I take my career very seriously. I put in 60, 70 hours a week into my commercial real estate career. We'll talk about that. I help people buy, sell, and lease commercial real estate. We have a heavy focus on the city of Detroit. We buy and sell a lot of apartment buildings. We do a lot of tenant representation with anything from 1,500 square foot coffee shops to 30,000 square foot warehouses. We did a 450,000 square foot warehouse deal a couple of years ago in Detroit. We help people buy, sell, and lease commercial real estate. That's what we do. But when I see a problem and I have the ability to fix it, or I see an issue that needs to be addressed, sometimes I'm not the right person to do that. You mentioned the TED Talk, and I need to bring that up because every time I do anything like this, I always talk about my daughter, Ella.
Yes, yes.
My daughter, Ella, has a couple of rare conditions. One of them is called Coffin-Cyrus syndrome. Coffin-Cyrus syndrome is a genetic mutation that causes structural defects in the body. There's about 500 or 600 known cases in the world, and each person who has it it's like a Chinese menu of what the different conditions that they have. One of her major conditions is called agenesis of the corpus callosum, which means that the corpus callosum, which is the bridge that connects the right and left side of the brain, never developed. She also has something called cyclical vomiting syndrome. It's a pain in the ass. Google it. It sounds exactly like what it is. But that's something that's one of the reasons why she was in the hospital so much. If you've seen any of my sort of content and talked about her hospital stays between 2015 and 2019, that was the cause of that. And she also has something called cavernous transformation of the portal vein, which is a structural defect in her liver. One of the symptoms that she has from this combo is that she's nonverbal. She doesn't use words, but we have developed a language, which is a mix of ASL, American Sign Language, and signs that she made up. And that really started one day when we were listening to music and she was air drumming properly along with the music to the band Humphreys McGee. It was a song called The Triple Wide. My license plate is a reference to that, right? Like I'm passionate about that song and that band for many reasons, but one of them being because of Ella's connection to the song. Her ability to communicate is pretty wild and pretty specific to her. But if you spend 30 minutes with her and you're paying attention, right? Not dismissing her because she's somebody with special needs, but if you're paying attention for 30 minutes, you can communicate with her. She's an unbelievably good communicator. In 2021, I was asked to give a TED Talk about how we used music to create this language for her. So if you go to my Facebook page, the mistake that I made was I used copyrighted music in the TED Talk, so it didn't go on TED's YouTube channel. Sucks for me, all right? The branding agency that one day is going to take me on is going to call me an idiot, but I'm not on TED's YouTube channel because I used copyrighted music in my presentation. But if you go to my Facebook page, the pinned post is that TED Talk, and it'll explain everything that I'm talking about. Through that, people approached me and asked me to talk to their companies and organizations about nonverbal communication and how to use it. And so I do a lot of public speaking, real estate offices, nonprofits, corporations, sales teams, people who are looking to talk about how to use nonverbal communication to better their sales, better their lives, better their companies, things like that. The reason why it's important for me to bring this up is because there's a book called Think and Grow Rich, and Napoleon Hill is the author of that book, and he talks about his son who was deaf, and he said, I put it out there. If you want something, put it out in the world. And he would talk about how if there's a cure for his son's deafness, that he wants people to approach him. And people would say, you're setting a bad expectation. There's no cure for deafness. And he said, I don't know what this looks like, but I'm putting this out there. And doctors reached out to him, and they had an experimental piece of equipment called a phonograph, and they wanted to use that for hearing. And his son got the first of what is now called a cochlear implant. And his son had 70% hearing in his 20s. So every time I do something like this, I always bring it up and say, this is the condition that my daughter has. That's how we got to the music and the TED Talk and put all that together. But that's what we do. We're very involved with Friendship Circle. You know, we do a lot of work with them because they're very helpful to our family. We're very involved in the special needs community. We're very involved in the nonverbal communication community.
Mm-hmm. Well, Benji, thank you again for sharing about your daughter Ella. And I'm sorry we didn't get to it earlier in the conversation because we were talking about so many other things.
We covered a lot.
We covered so much. I highly, 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 highly encourage you watching the TED Talk because I think it's only 11, 12 minutes long, and it is absolutely remarkable what he talks about with nonverbal communication. Not only is Ella an amazing person, and she really shows you the art of nonverbal communication through these 12 minutes of TED talking, but also just the story behind it is amazing. And obviously Benji as an advocate and talking to you now, like it makes it so much sweeter to watch that TED talk and really understand the story behind that. I think your kind of perception on how best to live life is, you find a problem or something that's going on and you kind of face it head on, which I love because it's very easy to avoid all of these issues that are going on in life. And, if we want to talk about rate cuts, whatever, like I don't want to bore people, but like there's a lot going on in the real estate industry that like now that rates have been cut, like you're gonna be a lot more busy, I would imagine. So there's a lot going on there. But then on top of that, right, you make time for other things that you're passionate about, like your music, advocating for your daughter. There's Jewish community. Like there's so many other things that you do on top of that to kind of promote yourself as a person that I feel like is you're one of the most, I would say, unique guests that I've had on, because you touch so many different areas, which I think is really cool. And for you to continue to do that and be proud of who you are while doing that is absolutely amazing.
I appreciate that. It means a lot to me. I've been, thank you. Sometimes it's hard to take a compliment, so I'll just say thank you. I think since you reached out to me, I've been thinking about branding, and I am really not good at branding. I don't have a brand per se. I have a diverse plate full of random things that are not connected by anything other than me.
Right.
And I tried to put together a website, and I'm like, none of these things are connected and none of these things make sense. I have a website, yujam.com, where I sell merch. I sell shirts, right? And some of those shirts are Detroit related, and some of those shirts are jam band, Fish, and Grateful Dead related, and some of those shirts are Israel advocacy, and some of those shirts are about sobriety and my recovery podcast, and some of those, and it's like none of those things are connected. From a branding perspective, I'm a mess, right? I best of luck to any branding agency that wants to help me, right? That's irrelevant. I think that my brand is me, right? I'm a guy. My name is Benji, and if I can help you, I will, and if I can't, I'll try to point you in the right direction. That's about it, so
and
that's
I kind of, to that point, I think a lot of people are in the same boat as you, where they're doing millions of different things, and their websites here, that, but like you also have a podcast. Like at the end of the day, it doesn't matter, right, how neat your website is. Like, yeah, to a degree, sure, you can argue if you want to get more business, your website has to be more polished. But at the end of the day, personal branding is, like you said, about, how can you help other people and how do you communicate that to other people? I think, for somebody like you, where you're touching different areas, like I'd argue that your personal brand is all but a mess, right? Your actual brand, right? There's no Benji Rosenzweig complete physical brand, logo, whatever. But your personal brand is extremely strong because you touch so many different areas, and you're notable in every single area. So I would argue, contrary to what you believe in, I believe your brand is just fine, and you should continue to do what you're doing.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Of course.
I want to make you laugh with something, if I may.
Go for it.
I brought up the selling merch, the t-shirt stuff. So my dad passed away last summer, and we were sitting around during Shiva telling stories. I don't know if you noticed, I like to laugh. And my family does as well. Most of us have a good sense of humor. I'll let them, if they're listening, figure out who I'm excluding from that good sense of humor. But my aunt told me that my dad owned a restaurant in Israel in the 80s called Yussel's. It was the first American deli. It started in Tzfat, and then we moved to Harnof. It was on Strauss, and then on King George. But he had this restaurant called Yussel's, and she told us that my dad wanted to make shirts for the restaurant that said "Kiss Me, I'm Teufeld," in the style of "Kiss Me, I'm Irish." And man, we laughed. And she was like, my mom freaked out, was like, "We're not doing that," and like wouldn't let my dad. And my dad pushed, and there was like, for a year, my dad tried to get my mom to allow him to make these shirts that say "Kiss Me, I'm Teufeld." And my My mom would not allow it. And so I want to move the camera here, but
Uh,
I made the shirts.
there we go.
So
there we go. I was wondering, I only saw them again, David. I was like wondering what the text, like I saw it pop up a little bit, but I love that shirt. That is a phenomenal idea. I think every, kosher restaurant owner should have that shirt. Like there's literally no reason not to. That is a perfect way to end this episode, Benji. Like that, I love that story. And I think, it's a testament to like who you are, right? You like to laugh, you like to have fun, but then also, kind of that piece that we've been talking about throughout this entire time is like, you still have that strong sense of advocacy for things that you are extremely, extremely passionate about. And Benji, before we officially let you off the hook, I know most people can find you on social media, but maybe for people that haven't seen your work across social media, across the various things that you're doing, where can people find you and reach you on the internet?
I'm really easy to find. On Instagram, I'm at Benji Rosenzweig. On Facebook, I think my Facebook link might be YU Jam, but I'm Benji Rosenzweig on Facebook. I'm really easy to find. I'm no longer on Twitter because after I was hacked for the second time and became a Bitcoin bot, I said I don't have the time or energy to deal with this again. I'm on Threads, I'm on YouTube, I'm on LinkedIn. I don't use any special handle. If you look for Benji Rosenzweig, or if you Google YU Jam, I'm really easy to find.
So make sure we're following Benji. Make sure you go watch the TED Talk. And obviously, make sure to share this episode with someone. There's a lot of music junkies out there. And Benji is the music junkie of all music junkies. So share this with a music junkie or somebody that is passionate about advocacy. There's no reason not to. Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of the podcast. Make sure to follow Schmoozing Time on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. Also, make sure to follow Schmoozing Time on whatever platform you are listening to this podcast on. Until next time, keep schmoozing.